It started with that smile. Her smile. Sharp, dazzling, like it had been sculpted by a master artist. It used to be mine. These days, it wasn't. I didn't realize how much that stung until I saw her staring at her phone, grinning like she was in on some secret joke. The first real clue came on a Friday night. Claire was on the couch, legs folded neatly beneath her, scrolling through her phone like always. I came in after a grueling late-night meeting at the office, balancing a takeout bag in one hand and a half-empty coffee cup in the other. She glanced up briefly, barely muttering a distracted, "Oh, hey," before her eyes flicked back to the glowing screen. Nothing unusual there. But then came the buzz, a soft vibration followed by a ping. Her phone lit up, and instead of ignoring it like she usually did, Claire pounced on it. Her fingers moved so quickly across the screen, it was like she was racing a clock. "Work emergency?" I joked, setting the food on the counter, trying to sound casual. She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then she flashed me a smile, too casual, too easy. "Huh? Kinda?" They're finalizing the campaign rollout, and I'm the point person. Her tone was smooth, almost rehearsed. Before I could say another word, she was back at it, thumbs flying across the screen. She didn't even follow me into the kitchen when I started unpacking the food. No, she stayed curled up on the couch, completely absorbed. I stood there for a moment, a strange tightness creeping into my chest. She looked so comfortable, but not the kind of comfortable that included me anymore. The next day it happened again. This time, we had plans to meet her friend Melanie for brunch. Bottomless mimosas, Claire's absolute favorite indulgence. But an hour before we were supposed to leave, she walked into the room wearing her work clothes. A tailored blazer, perfectly pressed pants, every strand of hair in place. "Hey babe," she said lightly, almost too lightly. "Can we reschedule? Something's come up at work. They need me on a call." Her words were like silk, smooth and polished, and she added an apologetic smile for good measure. I hesitated, disappointment creeping into my voice despite my best effort to hide it. "Sure," I said with a shrug. What else could I do? She grabbed her laptop bag and headed for the door, but something didn't sit right. Claire was meticulous, borderline obsessive about her planner. It was her lifeline, always by her side. Yet there it was, sitting abandoned on the counter. I watched her leave, my gaze shifting between the planner and the door. An odd feeling gnawed at me, something I couldn't explain. Acting on instinct, I walked to the window and peeked out. I watched as she got into her car and drove in the opposite direction of her office. I followed her. At first, it felt ridiculous, like I'd stumbled into some cheesy TV drama. But as I trailed her at a cautious distance, my heart pounded harder with every turn. She pulled onto a quiet residential street, lined with modest houses. Definitely not her office. Claire parked in front of one of the houses and glanced at herself in the rearview mirror, adjusting her lipstick. My stomach twisted. That's when the front door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident smile that didn't belong in a work meeting. I watched in silence as Claire got out of the car. He walked up to her, leaning in close. Too close. Then he kissed her, and she kissed him back. Not a casual peck. Not a polite greeting. It was the kind of kiss I hadn't had from her in months. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember getting out of the car. By the time I sat down at the kitchen table, I felt hollow, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Claire had already jumped, oblivious to the fact that I'd seen her fall. When she walked through the door that evening, it was like nothing had happened. She came in with the same effortless grace, tossing her keys on the counter and kicking off her heels. "Hey, babe," she said cheerfully, pulling a bottle of wine from the fridge. "How was your day?" I studied her, searching for a crack in her facade. Guilt, hesitation, anything, but she was flawless. Too flawless. "Same old," I replied evenly. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had more. As we sat at the table, the wine between us, I started noticing things I'd missed before. Her phone, face down, but never far from her hand. The faint scent of cologne on her blazer. A scent that wasn't mine. The way she avoided my eyes when I asked about her work meeting. Oh, it was exhausting, she sighed dramatically, swirling her wine like she didn't have a care in the world. Tom kept nitpicking the presentation. "You know how he is." I nodded, playing along. "Yeah, Tom's a real pain." "What did he say this time?" Her hand twitched, just barely, but enough for me to catch it. "Oh, just the usual," she said with a dismissive wave. "He doesn't think the numbers support the creative direction." She quickly changed the subject. "So, what should we do this weekend? Maybe a hike." A hike? Claire hated hiking. Bugs, dirt, the uphill climb. She despised all of it. But I didn't call her out. Not yet. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Every inconsistency. Every subtle crack in her carefully polished facade. I logged it all. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I picked up her phone. Just touching it felt like crossing a line, but my gut pushed me forward. The lock screen flashed, and what I saw made my stomach twist. A message preview from someone named Mike. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing." My hands trembled as I tried to unlock it, swiping at the screen like I could will it open. No luck. It was passcode protected, and none of the obvious guesses worked. Our anniversary, her birthday, nothing. Frustrated, I set it down just as the water stopped running. My heart raced as I hurried back to the bed, barely settling in before she stepped out of the bathroom. A towel was wrapped loosely around her, her damp hair framing her face like nothing was out of the ordinary. "You're up early," she said with a smile, drying her hair casually. "Couldn't sleep." I lied, forcing my face into something resembling normal. The truth? I hadn't slept well in weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. That kiss, that smile, the one that used to be mine. That morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit idly by, drowning in her lies. I needed proof. Something irrefutable. Something she couldn't explain away with another smooth excuse. Later that afternoon, I called my friend Eric. Eric was a cop, someone I trusted implicitly. I didn't give him the whole story, just enough to make him understand. "Look, man," I said, lowering my voice. "I need help figuring out what's going on. Can you connect me with someone?" Eric didn't ask for details. "I know a guy," he said after a moment. "Private investigator. He's discreet and thorough. If there's something going on, he'll find it." By the time Claire came home that evening, I had already spoken to the investigator. His name was Matt, and he didn't waste time. "I'll start tomorrow," he said. "But you need to keep everything normal. If she gets suspicious, this could go sideways fast." Keeping things normal turned out to be the hardest part. Every smile she gave me felt like a knife, every laugh hollow. But I played my part, keeping my questions casual and my tone even. All the while, a quiet storm brewed inside me, churning with a single, haunting thought. How long has she been this person, a stranger pretending to be my wife? The next few days dragged by in a haze of tension. Every interaction with Claire felt like navigating a minefield. She was as breezy as ever, but there were subtle shifts if you looked closely. She started humming to herself, a habit she hadn't had in years. She took extra care with her appearance, even on days we had no plans. And her phone? It buzzed constantly, always within arm's reach. Thursday night, she dropped another bombshell. "I've got a work dinner," she said, rolling her eyes as she smoothed out the sleek black dress she was wearing. "They're making me schmooze with a new client. I swear, if I have to hear about his yacht collection one more time." I didn't blink. "Need me to drop you off?" Parking downtown's a pain. Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it. A slight stiffening of her shoulders, a flicker of hesitation, before she brushed me off with a casual wave. "Nah, it's fine. I'll just grab an Uber." "Thanks, though." She left at 7 p.m., dressed in heels I hadn't seen her wear in years. As soon as the door clicked shut, I called Matt. "She's on the move," I told him. "Got it," he replied. "I'll let you know what I find." Waiting was pure agony. I couldn't focus on the TV or the book in my lap. Even the whiskey I poured sat untouched on the table. Finally, my phone buzzed and Matt's name lit up the screen. "She's not at a work dinner," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She's at a restaurant on 5th Street. Fancy place. She's with a guy. Matches the description. Tall, dark hair, clean-shaven." My grip tightened on the phone. "What are they doing?" "Talking. Laughing. She looks comfortable. Way too comfortable for work." He hesitated. "I'm sending you some photos. You need to see this." A moment later, my phone pinged. I opened the images, and the room seemed to close in on me. There she was, sitting across from a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Polished, confident, smug. Her face glowed as she leaned toward him, her eyes locked on his like he was the only thing that mattered. One photo in particular hit me like a freight train, her hand resting on his, their fingers intertwined. Intimate, careless, like they didn't have a single worry in the world. I don't know how long I stared at the pictures before Matt's voice broke through the silence. Wanted to keep following them? Yes, I said, my voice like ice. Don't lose them. The next 2 hours crawled by like a bad dream. I couldn't escape. Matt's updates came sporadically, each one another blow to the gut. They left the restaurant, strolled down the street hand in hand, and finally disappeared into a boutique hotel. A hotel? I repeated, my voice flat. Yeah, Matt confirmed. They checked in together. I hung up the phone without a word, my chest tightening as though a vice had clamped around it. My thoughts spun in endless circles, chaotic and relentless. I didn't need any more proof. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. This wasn't something she could twist into an excuse. Claire wasn't just lying to me. She was building an entirely different life behind my back. When she walked through the door later that night, I was still on the couch, staring blankly at the photos Matt had sent. She breezed in like nothing had happened, casually kicking off her heels and stretching like it was just another night. "You're up late," she said lightly, her voice carrying that same disarming warmth I used to find so comforting. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice steady but cold, concealing the storm that raged inside me. I looked at her, at the woman I thought I knew, and a single unshakable question echoed in my mind. "Who are you?" For now, I bottled it up, but I knew the time was coming. The lies were too big to stay hidden forever, and when the moment came, there would be no escape for her. The next morning, I could barely stand to look at her. She moved around the kitchen like she always did, humming softly as she poured her coffee, oblivious to the weight of what I now knew. She didn't belong here anymore, not after what she'd done. "Big plans today?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder with an easy smile. "Not much," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You?" "Oh, the usual grind," she replied with a shrug. "Lots of calls, some emails. You know how it is." Her lie was so effortless, so polished, it made my stomach churn. The sheer audacity of it all left me seething, but I swallowed my anger. Not yet. I needed the right moment. By the afternoon, the pressure became unbearable. I picked up the phone and called Eric, my cop friend. "Eric," I said, my voice tight, "I need advice. How do you confront someone when you already know they're lying?" He didn't need details to understand the weight behind my words. After a pause, he spoke calmly. "If you come in hot, she'll shut down or go on the defensive. You need her to admit it. Get her talking first. And if she doesn't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then you show her the proof," he said bluntly. "But you need to be ready for what comes after. This isn't just about catching her. It's about deciding what you're going to do next." That evening, Claire came home earlier than usual. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her demeanor as breezy and casual as ever. It was like nothing had happened, like everything was fine. I waited until after dinner, when we were sitting on the couch. The TV was on, playing one of her favorite reality shows. She laughed at something on the screen, her head resting against my shoulder. And that's when I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who's Mike?" I asked, my voice steady, my tone sharp. Her body stiffened instantly. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she pulled back, looking at me with a mix of confusion and forced innocence. "Mike, what are you talking about?" I didn't blink. "The guy you've been seeing, the one you had dinner with last night, the one you checked into a hotel with." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she was searching for the right words. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice rising. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. I reached for my phone, opening the photo Matt had sent me. I held it up, letting her see everything. Her hand on his, that radiant smile on her face, the hotel in the background. Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but then her expression shifted. Her jaw tightened, and her eyes sparked with defiance. "Were you spying on me?" she demanded, her voice sharp with indignation. I blinked, caught off guard by the sheer audacity of her response. "Spying on you? Are you seriously trying to turn this around on me?" You invaded my privacy, she shot back, standing up now, her voice rising. How dare you? How dare I? I repeated, my voice louder now as I stood to face her. How dare you cheat on me, Claire? How dare you lie to my face, day after day, while you're off playing house with some other guy? Her eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too. Guilt, buried beneath the bravado. You don't understand, she hissed. Then make me understand, I shouted, my voice cracking with the weight of it all. She looked away, her shoulders slumping ever so slightly. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she muttered, I wasn't happy. Her words landed like a sucker punch. I stared at her, my mind reeling. You weren't happy? I repeated, incredulous. And instead of talking to me, you decided to what? Replace me? It wasn't like that, she said quickly, her tone defensive. You've been so distant, so focused on work. I didn't feel seen anymore. Her excuses only fanned the flames of my anger. So, your solution was to sneak around behind my back? Do you have any idea what you've done? To us? To me? For the first time, her facade cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or frustration. I'm sorry, she whispered, but the words felt empty. Hollow. Sorry, I repeated, shaking my head. You're not sorry, Claire. You're sorry you got caught. She didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed her phone and stormed out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I sank back onto the couch, the weight of everything crashing down around me. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, was gone, and in her place was someone I didn't even recognize. For the first time, it hit me, confronting Claire wasn't the end of this nightmare. It was just the beginning. The real decisions, the ones that would shape the rest of my life, were still ahead. The bedroom door stayed shut for hours. I remained in the living room, staring at nothing, replaying the confrontation over and over in my head. Her excuses, her lies, the audacity of her trying to shift the blame onto me. It was a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and a deep, gnawing sadness. Around midnight, I heard the door creak open. Her footsteps were tentative, hesitant. Claire stopped a few feet away, the silence between us thick enough to choke on. Can we talk? She asked, her voice soft, almost timid. I glanced at her, my face hard and unreadable. Talk about what? The lies? The betrayal? Or are you going to tell me how this is all my fault again? Her eyes flickered with frustration, but she quickly buried it beneath a mask of remorse. She sat on the edge of the couch, keeping a deliberate distance between us. I made a mistake, she said quietly. But you have to understand, I never meant for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. Didn't want to hurt me. My voice was sharp, each word cutting like glass. Claire, you didn't just stumble into an affair. This wasn't some accident. You lied over and over for months. This was deliberate. She flinched at my words, her hands tightening into fists in her lap. I was lonely, she said after a moment, her voice strained. I felt like we were drifting apart, and then Mike, he listened. He made me feel wanted again. Her confession was a knife in my gut, but I refused to let her see the wound. And instead of coming to me, your husband, you ran to him? I asked, my voice low and bitter. You didn't even give me a chance, Claire. You just decided I wasn't enough anymore. Her face crumpled like she might finally take responsibility. But then her posture stiffened, her tone shifting defensively. You've been distant, Nate. Always working late, always glued to your computer. It's like I wasn't even here. I stared at her, incredulous. So now it's my fault? Because I worked hard to provide for us? I'm not saying it's your fault, she shot back, her voice tight with frustration. I'm just saying it wasn't all my fault either. I stood up, pacing the room in an effort to control the rising tide of anger. Unbelievable, I muttered, shaking my head. Even now, you're still trying to justify it. I'm not justifying anything, she snapped, standing as well. I said, I'm sorry, Nate. What more do you want from me? I turned to face her, my eyes burning with intensity. I want the truth. How long has this been going on? How many lies have you told me? And what do you even want from this marriage now? Her mouth opened, but no words came out at first. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, It started a few months ago. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought I thought I could stop. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh even in my own ears. Stop? Claire, you checked into a hotel with him last night. That's not stopping. That's a full-blown affair. Her face flushed, guilt and shame warring with defiance. I know I messed up, she said, her voice barely audible. But I want to fix this. I want us to work. Her plea made my head spin. Fix this? I echoed, disbelief dripping from my words. After everything you've destroyed, you think you can fix this? Tears streamed down her face now, her voice cracking with desperation. I'm begging you, Nate. I'll do whatever it takes, therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us. Her words barely registered. All I could think about was the nights I spent alone, wondering where I went wrong, while she was out living a double life. Claire, I said coldly, my voice steady but devoid of warmth. You left me for another man. Maybe not physically at first, but emotionally, you've been gone for a long time. She broke down into sobs, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Her tears felt foreign, like they belonged to someone I didn't recognize. She was right about one thing. There was no going back to how things were. The only question was, did I even want to move forward with her? Or was this the end? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Claire's pleas echoed in my mind, clashing with the damning images Matt had sent. Her tear-streaked face, begging for forgiveness, felt as unreal as the photos of her with another man. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I'd made a decision. I needed space. Time away from her, from the house, from the mess we'd become. She was still asleep when I grabbed my car keys. I didn't wake her. Instead, I drove to a park we used to visit back when we first started dating. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet I desperately needed. I sat on a bench, staring out at the still water, trying to sort through the chaos in my mind. But just as I began to feel a sliver of clarity, my phone buzzed. A text from Matt. We need to talk. Something's come up. I called him immediately, my voice tight with apprehension. What's going on? There was a pause, and then Matt spoke carefully. I was reviewing the hotel security footage just to make sure we didn't miss anything. And well, I found something you're not going to like. What do you mean? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. It's not just this Mike guy, he said, his tone heavy. She's been to that hotel before. With someone else. The words hit me like a freight train. What the hell are you saying? There's another man, Matt confirmed, his voice steady but grim. Different guy. Same hotel. The footage was a few months old, but the evidence was undeniable. Claire wasn't just involved with one man. There was another. A pattern. A deliberate, calculated betrayal. Are you sure? I asked, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wouldn't bring it up if I wasn't, Matt replied, his tone steady but heavy. I've got the footage. I can send it to you. Send it, I said, my voice cold. Then I hung up, my thoughts spiraling. Another man? This wasn't just an affair. It was an entire facade. Layer upon layer of lies. When the video came through, I forced myself to watch it. My stomach churned as I saw Claire walking into the hotel lobby, arm in arm with someone else. This man was older, gray at the temples, and carried himself with the ease of wealth and power. They laughed together as they checked in, her head resting on his shoulder, like they didn't have a care in the world. By the time I returned home, anger had given way to something colder, sharper. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. She looked up as I walked in, her face pale and wary. You left early, she said tentatively. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the video Matt had sent, and set it on the table in front of her. She stared at the screen, her face draining of all color as the footage played. When it ended, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. Nate, don't, I said, cutting her off, my voice like a blade. Don't you dare try to explain this away. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't touch me this time. It's not what it looks like, she whispered, her voice trembling. Then why, I said, my tone icy. Does it look exactly like an affair? You didn't just betray me with one man, Claire. This wasn't about you feeling lonely. This is who you are. She shook her head violently. No, I was confused. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Stop lying, I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. You've been lying for months, maybe years. How many more are there, Claire? How many men have you been sneaking around with while I sat at home, like a fool? She broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. Please, Nate. I can't lose you. I know I messed up, but I love you. I swear I do. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Love? You think this is love? You don't even know what that means. Love doesn't look like this. She reached for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us growing like a canyon. I don't know who you are anymore, I said, my voice quiet but resolute. But I know one thing. You're not the woman I married. Her sobs grew louder, filling the room, but I didn't stay to hear them. I turned and walked out the door, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. For the first time, I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. I didn't leave the guest room until morning. Sleep was a lost cause. By the time sunlight seeped through the blinds, my mind was made up. This wasn't something Claire could fix with promises and apologies. Trust wasn't just broken, it was annihilated. When I came out, Claire was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered. Nate, she began cautiously. We need to talk, I said, my voice firm but calm. I pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, folding my hands on the table. She closed the laptop slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Okay. I took a deep breath, meeting her eyes. For the first time in days, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. I've thought about everything. The affair. The lies. What you said last night. My voice was steady, but my chest felt tight as I continued. Claire, I don't think I can do this anymore. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. What? No, Nate. Please. Don't say that. I have to, I said, my tone unwavering. I've been trying to imagine a way forward, but no matter how hard I try, I can't see a future where I trust you again. And without trust, there's nothing left. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Nate, please, she begged, her voice breaking. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us. Her desperation didn't move me. I had given her everything, my heart, my loyalty, my life, and she'd thrown it away. I gave you a chance, I said, my voice low but firm. You had months to tell me something was wrong. Instead, you made a choice, a deliberate, conscious choice to betray me. Her tears turned to full-on sobs, but I pressed on. You didn't just cheat, Claire. You built an entire world behind my back. And then you came home every night and pretended everything was fine. That's not something I can forgive. I was lost, she cried, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to talk to you. I didn't know how to fix us. Fix us? I repeated, incredulous. You didn't even try, Claire. You didn't give me a chance. And now it's too late. She stood suddenly, gripping the edge of the table, as though it was the only thing holding her up. So that's it, she asked, her voice trembling. 8 years together, and you're just walking away? You're giving up on us? I stood up, meeting her glare with a calm that felt alien even to me. You gave up on us the moment you let him into your life, I said evenly. I'm just choosing not to live a lie anymore. Her face twisted, caught between anger and heartbreak. You're not even willing to try? She asked, her voice trembling. No, I replied firmly. I'm not. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked so small, so defeated. I don't want to lose you, Nate, she whispered, her voice breaking. You already did, I said softly, the words carrying a finality that left no room for argument. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, silent and shattered. That afternoon, I made the call. A divorce attorney. I didn't hesitate. This wasn't a decision I wanted to drag out. Staying in the wreckage of what we had would only destroy me further, and I refused to let her betrayal define the rest of my life. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for us, but it was the only one I could live with. Within a week, the divorce papers were ready. I'd chosen a lawyer who moved quickly. There was no sense in prolonging the inevitable. When I handed Claire the papers, she stared at them like they were a ticking bomb. What is this?" she stammered, her hands trembling. "It's what happens when you destroy a marriage," I said bluntly. "You want it out, Claire, even if you didn't have the guts to say it. This is me giving you what you wanted." Her face went pale, her grip on the papers so tight, I thought they might tear. I don't want this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I told you, I want to fix us. I leaned back, crossing my arms. There is no us anymore. You ended that the second you let him into your life. This isn't fixable. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. She wasn't crying because she loved me or wanted to save our marriage. She was crying because she'd lost control. I don't want to lose you, she said again, her voice cracking. You already did, I said coldly. And if you cared as much as you claimed to, you wouldn't have thrown me away like yesterday's garbage. She tried to argue, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to cling to what little power she thought she still had. I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I made a mistake. But we've been together for so long, Nate. We can't just end it like this. We can, I said firmly. And we are. You made your choice, Claire. Now I'm making mine. She didn't take the papers to a lawyer right away. She let them sit on the counter, untouched, as though ignoring them might undo the damage. She tried everything to make me reconsider. One night, she appeared at the door to the guest room, wearing a dress she hadn't worn in years. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, as though we were heading out for a romantic dinner. Nate, she said softly, stepping into the room. Can we just talk? Please. I glanced at her, unimpressed. We'd done plenty of talking. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, too close for comfort. I miss you, she murmured, her voice low, tinged with an attempt at seduction. I miss us. I shook my head and stood, putting distance between us. Don't do this, Claire. You don't miss me. You miss the life you were comfortable with. But you killed that life. Her expression hardened, the mask slipping for the first time. So that's it, she snapped. You're just going to throw everything away because I made a mistake? You didn't just make a mistake, I said, my voice rising. You made a series of conscious decisions, over and over, to betray me. Don't you dare minimize what you did. She stood abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. Fine. If that's how you feel, then maybe you weren't the perfect husband either. I laughed bitterly. And there it is, the blame game. You've got no one to blame but yourself, Claire. You don't get to rewrite history to make yourself the victim. Her face twisted in frustration, and she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. In the days that followed, I began packing my things. The house felt suffocating, every corner a reminder of what we'd lost, or maybe what I'd been blind to all along. I didn't wait for her to file the papers. I pushed for a quick sale of the house, splitting the proceeds evenly. I refused to let her drag this out or keep me tethered to her in any way. By the end of the month, I was gone, a suitcase in one hand, a lease agreement for a small apartment in the other. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with thin walls and outdated fixtures, but it was mine. A clean slate, a fresh start. Claire called a few times after I left. Each time, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear her apologies or excuses anymore. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The storm was over, and while I was battered and bruised, I was still standing. I thought leaving the house would bring me peace, but the aftermath of a betrayal like Claire's doesn't disappear just because you change your surroundings. My first week in the new apartment felt hollow, like the silence was taunting me, forcing me to confront the weight of everything that had happened. Every room in my new apartment echoed with silence, my thoughts louder than I wanted them to be. The first night, I tried to drown them out with the TV, but even that fell hollow. By the second night, she called again. The phone buzzed insistently on the counter, but I let it ring just as I had before. This time, she left a voicemail. Nate, please, just hear me out, her voice pleaded, cracking with emotion. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to talk. Please just call me back. I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting the message without hesitation. I didn't want to hear her excuses again, but she wasn't done. The next day, she showed up at my office. I spotted her through the glass doors, standing in the lobby with a frantic look on her face. My stomach churned, anger bubbling up again. This wasn't the time or place for her dramatics, but there she was, forcing herself into my day. Nate, she called as I stepped into the lobby. Her voice was soft, pleading. I just need a few minutes. Please. I sighed heavily, glancing around at my co-workers who were undoubtedly watching. I gestured toward the cafe across the street, not wanting to air our mess where I worked. Once we were seated, I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, my expression impassive. "Make it quick," I said, my tone flat. Claire fidgeted with the strap of her purse, her eyes darting around like she was trying to gather her thoughts. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "Again, I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you, but I mean it." I didn't respond, my silence prompting her to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her voice stronger now, "about why I did what I did about us. And I know I hurt you probably more than I'll ever understand, but I still love you, Nate. I can't just let you go without trying everything to make it right." Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation, but they didn't land the way she hoped. "You still love me?" I asked, my voice calm but cutting. "You've got a hell of a way of showing it, Claire." Her face crumpled, tears pooling in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You didn't think about love when you were with him," I said, my voice sharp. "You didn't think about me, about us, about what we had. And now, because you feel guilty, you want to fix it? It doesn't work like that." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "But I can't just walk away from you, Nate. You're everything to me. Was I everything to you when you were sneaking off to hotels?" I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "Because from where I'm sitting, I look like Plan B, and I refuse to be anyone's backup option." She flinched as if I'd physically struck her. Her tears came faster, but I felt no sympathy. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely audible. "Stop calling it a mistake." I snapped, the bitterness in my tone undeniable. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did was a choice. Over and over. Fully aware of the cost." For a moment, we sat in silence. Her quiet sobs filled the awkward void, and I noticed a few people at nearby tables glancing in our direction. Finally, I stood, grabbing my coat. "Claire, this is over," I said, my voice firm. "No amount of apologies or tears will fix what you broke. Do yourself a favor and let me go, because I've already let you go." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out, leaving her sitting there, her tears dripping onto the untouched coffee in front of her. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of finality. Claire had shown me who she really was, and I had made my choice to walk away. The weight of her betrayal still lingered, but I was learning how to carry it without letting it crush me. I didn't owe her forgiveness. What I owed was to myself. To heal, to move forward, and to never settle for someone who could so easily destroy what we had built. Claire might have been my past, but she wasn't going to be my future. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Not happy, exactly. There was still too much pain, too much betrayal to process, but I wasn't drowning in it anymore. Her visit to my office had been the final nail in the coffin. Not because she begged, but because I finally saw how little she truly understood the damage she'd done. I got up, brewed a pot of coffee, and let the stillness of my new apartment envelop me. There was no sound of her heels clicking across the floor, no humming from the other room. For the first time, I realized I didn't miss those things. The silence wasn't lonely, it was mine. Midway through my second cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Hey man, you good? Just checking in." I smiled faintly and typed back. "Yeah, I think I'm finally okay." I spent the day unpacking boxes, sorting through the fragments of my old life. As I sifted through photos, letters, and mementos, I found a framed picture of Claire and me from our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so carefree. I stared at it for a long moment before placing it face down. Some memories didn't need to follow me into the future. That evening, I received an email from Matt, the private investigator. It was a follow-up, something he'd promised to send once the case was closed. "Hey Nate, just closing the loop. Wanted to let you know I followed up on Claire's activities after your confrontation. As far as I can tell, she's completely cut ties with the other guy. Just thought you want to know." I stared at the email from Sam, the private investigator, his offer lingering in my mind. "Let me know if there's anything else I can do for you." His update, that Claire had cut ties with the other man, felt hollow. It didn't matter anymore. She could have erased his number, deleted every message, and burned every memory of him. But none of it could undo what she'd done. None of it could erase the months of lies or the nights I spent wondering where I'd gone wrong. Still, I typed a quick reply. Thanks for everything, Sam. Appreciate it. I closed the laptop, feeling a strange sense of finality. Over the next week, I focused on rebuilding. I started going to the gym again, not as a distraction, but because it felt good to channel my energy into something productive. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. It struck me how much of my world had revolved around Claire, and how much of myself I'd let slip away in the process. One night, sitting on my couch with a beer in hand, I thought about the man I used to be before Claire. I'd been ambitious, independent-driven. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost pieces of myself trying to build a life with her. But now, I had the chance to reclaim them. The final step came when I signed the divorce papers. Claire had finally returned them, signed and notarized, after what I assumed was a lengthy discussion with her lawyer. She'd included a handwritten note on the back of the envelope. Nate, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I hope someday you'll understand how much I regret everything I did. You didn't deserve this, and I'm sorry I let you down. I'll always love you, even if I didn't show it the way I should have. I hope you find happiness again. I read the note twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. It wasn't forgiveness, but it felt like closure. The next morning, I signed my name on the dotted line, sealed the envelope, and dropped it off at the lawyer's office. As I walked outside into the crisp morning air, I felt a strange sense of freedom. My life was my own again, and for the first time in months, I wasn't haunted by Claire's betrayal. I wasn't healed yet, far from it, but I was moving forward, and that was enough. The days following the divorce were strange. Not empty, but unfamiliar. For so long, my life had revolved around Claire, her betrayal, our fractured marriage, that I hadn't stopped to imagine what life without her might look like. Now, the absence of chaos felt peaceful. I threw myself into work, but this time it wasn't an escape. During the marriage, I'd buried myself in projects to avoid facing the cracks between us. Now I worked with purpose. I started pitching ideas that had been sitting in my head for years, and for the first time in forever, I felt creative again. One afternoon, during a brainstorming session, my coworker James leaned over and smirked. "You've been on fire lately, man. Did something change?" I thought about his question for a moment before answering. "Yeah," I said with a faint smile. "I think I finally stopped holding myself back. That weekend, I decided to revisit an old love. Hiking. Claire had hated it, complained about the bugs, the dirt, the effort, but I'd loved it before we got together. It had been one of the things I gave up to make our life fit better. I found a trail about an hour outside the city, tucked away in a quiet stretch of forest. As I climbed higher, the air grew cooler, the trees thicker. My legs burned with the effort, but it felt good, like I was shedding the weight of everything I'd been carrying. At the top, I stood on a rocky overlook, the world sprawling out before me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small or lost. I felt free. I pulled out my phone to snap a photo of the view. Later, when I looked at it, I noticed something I hadn't seen in the moment, a faint rainbow cutting across the sky. The next few weeks were filled with small victories. I found a rhythm in my new apartment, learned how to cook a few decent meals, and even picked up my guitar again, an old hobby I hadn't touched in years. Occasionally, Claire crossed my mind, not with anger or longing, but with a strange sense of detachment. I remembered her, but she felt like a character from another life, someone I used to know. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled across a post from a mutual friend. It was a photo of Claire at some event, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. She looked beautiful, as always, but there was something in her expression, an emptiness behind her smile. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. I felt nothing. I closed the app and went back to my book. Claire was part of my past, and I had no intention of letting her sneak back into my present. Rebuilding myself wasn't easy, but every day brought new clarity. I started journaling, not to dwell on what had happened, but to remind myself of who I was and who I wanted to become. In one entry, I wrote, "The betrayal hurt, but it also set me free." And I meant it. I lost her, but in losing her, I found myself. And that's a trade I'd make every time. The man I was becoming wasn't the same as the one who had entered that marriage, and that was okay. I didn't want to go back to who I'd been. I wanted to be better, stronger, wiser, more in tune with what I wanted out of life. I wasn't just healing, I was growing. And that was something no one, not Claire, not anyone, could ever take away from me. 6 months after the divorce, my life felt like an entirely new chapter. It wasn't perfect, healing never is, but it was mine. The echoes of Claire's betrayal still lingered in quieter moments, like faint scars you don't notice until you brush against them. But they no longer defined me. What defined me now was the life I was rebuilding, piece by piece, from the ground up. One evening, I found myself at a friend's party, a casual gathering full of people I didn't know. Normally, I would have skipped it, but I'd made a promise to myself. Say yes to new experiences, no matter how uncomfortable they felt. I was standing near the bar, nursing a drink, when someone stepped up beside me. "Whiskey neat," she said to the bartender, her voice calm and confident. I glanced over and saw her, a striking woman with curly dark hair and an easy smile. She caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, her tone playful. "Bold choice," I said, nodding to her drink. She grinned. "Bold's the only way to go." We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had slipped by. Her name was Emma, and she had a sharp wit that kept me on my toes. She wasn't afraid to challenge me, to ask hard questions, or to laugh at my sarcastic responses. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir, something that wasn't anger or regret or grief. Emma and I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't ready, and she respected that. We exchanged numbers and started talking. Slowly, something genuine began to grow between us. It wasn't easy. Trust wasn't something I could give freely anymore, not after what had happened with Claire. But Emma was patient. She didn't push, didn't demand. She just showed up, consistently proving with her actions what words could never fully convey. One night, as we sat on my couch sharing a bottle of wine and laughing at a ridiculous movie, Emma turned to me, her expression serious. "Nate," she said softly, "you don't talk much about your past. I don't want to push, but if you ever want to share, I'm here." Her words struck a chord. For so long, I kept the betrayal locked away, unwilling to let anyone near it. But with Emma, it felt different. Safe. I told her everything. About Claire, the affair, the fallout, the long, painful road I'd walked to get here. Emma listened without interrupting, her hand resting lightly on mine. When I finished, she didn't speak right away. Then she leaned in, her voice gentle but unwavering. "That says more about her than it ever will about you, Nate. You didn't deserve that." Her words unraveled something inside me, something I hadn't even realized I was still holding on to. Months turned into a year. Emma and I grew closer, and slowly, I let go of the fear that had once gripped me. Claire's shadow faded, replaced by the light of something real and honest. Looking back, I wouldn't have wished for the pain Claire caused me, but I wouldn't erase it either. It taught me lessons I hadn't known I needed, about resilience, self-worth, and the kind of love I deserved. One day, Emma and I stood together on the same hiking trail I'd climbed alone months earlier. The crisp air carried a quiet stillness, and as we reached the overlook, the world stretched out before us. In the distance, a faint rainbow cut through the sky. Life, I realized, wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about learning to stand tall when they passed, ready to chase the light on the other side. For the first time, I wasn't just moving forward, I was happy,